Welcome back, viewers. As indicated before we went on break, we have a very special guest with us this evening. His name is Dr. Daud Abdullah, and he is a local Grenadian son of the soil. As a matter of fact, a River Road boy. So all those from River Road, you should be proud. Dr. Abdullah, of course, obtained his first degree at the University of Guyana in 1981, went on to study Arabic at King's Saudi University in Saudi Arabia, and later joined the University of Khartoum, Sudan, to pursue graduate studies. He was awarded his doctorate in 1989. Dr. Abdullah is a lecturer in history, in particular at the University of Maiduguri in Nigeria, I hope I'm getting that right, and at Birkbeck College, University of London. He is the author of many books and contributed to many books in different topics ranging from Middle Eastern affairs, Hamas, Palestinian, and all of that. And he's here with us to have a discussion on what is happening in the Middle East and how serious, how dangerous, if that is the right word to use, as we move forward and as we see and develop what is happening in the Middle East. So, Dr. Abdullah, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. So probably I could start it off and ask, you know, from where you sit, the Middle East is a hotbed of, has always been, but it would appear now with this situation that's going on with Israel and Palestine, a lot more nations are getting pulled in to a state of affairs that is concerning, I think, to the world. And then we have the nations like England and the US and European nations that seem to be fueling one side over the next.
Sure.
You know, so what are your thoughts on what is happening there, and do you see, and this is, I suppose, $1 million question, a peaceful end to the situation?
Well, let me begin by saying that what is unfolding before our eyes is a process of decolonization, which we saw in Africa for decades throughout the 70s and 80s, culminating in the independence of several countries. And during that period, Palestine was one of those countries designated by the United Nations in its resolutions to attain independence. You see, all the countries with which it was associated with, like Mozambique and Angola and Namibia, they attained their independence. Palestine remained the exception. And the reason for this is because the Western countries which were responsible for planting and creating the state of Israel in Palestine were never committed to the realization of Palestinian independence. Even today, you know, they give lip service to the slogan of the two-state solution. You hear this all the time. But when Netanyahu himself and his ministers say there will be no two states, the West, they do not react in any way to hold him to account and to let him understand that this is the international standard that is required, a genuine two-state solution.
But does that put the United Nations as an organization of just words and no action? Because here the United Nations have resolved that Palestine should be a state.
Yes.
And there should be a two-state solution.
Indeed.
But here Israel, one country,
yes, deciding
for its security and other purposes, religious and otherwise, through the extreme aspects of the organization, that this must never happen?
I certainly agree with you. Look, the thing is, Israel was created by the United Nations, not like Grenada or Trinidad and Tobago, you know, which attained their independence from Britain. Israel was created by a resolution, and several countries, or the majority of countries, had opposed the resolution to partition Palestine. But due to pressure and threats and blackmail by the United States, countries like Haiti and Liberia and the Philippines voted for the partition. Now, when the state was created, when they declared this creation of the state in May 1948, they applied for membership to the UN. It was turned down. The Security Council rejected the application. The same happened in December of that year. It was not until 1949 that Israel was granted membership to the UN. And it was conditional You see, many of these countries like Grenada, and Barbados, we entered into the UN without any condition, except that we adhere to the charter. This country, Israel, had to give an undertaking that it would establish a democratic constitution, it would demarcate its borders, and it would implement Resolution 194, which called for the return of the Palestinian refugees. The resolution which gave them admission, 377, stipulated this, that they should allow the refugees to return. And 75 years on, they languish in squalid conditions across the region. So this is the crux of the problem, you see.
And looking ahead and how this war is developing, pulling in Egypt, there's a big controversy now about that strip between Egypt and Israel. And then you have the Golan Heights issue of Israel dominating this because of the water situation. I mean, Iran is being pulled in. Yeah. You have Egypt is being pulled in. Lebanon is being pulled in.
Sure.
And it seems as though this could widen and escalate.
Indeed.
And then I don't think I hear the US and European nations dealing in a instructive way to avoid this.
Well, they're not following the letter of the law. As I said, they give lip service. And if you remember when Donald Trump was in the presidency, he recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. When all the other countries in the world, including Grenada, upheld the view that this is occupied territory, and Jerusalem. And there is a principle in international law that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible. You remember when Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, what happened? The United States mobilized the coalition of the willing, you see? And they went and they drove Saddam Hussein out. They could do that to Israel, to get it out of the Golan Heights if they want. It's a lack of political will. It's a bias. It's
But is religion playing an aspect into this? Because you will hear the extremists in Israel talk about their rights religiously and otherwise. But do you believe there is a religious implication that is driving this thing?
It's coming to this. There's no doubt about it. The religious right in Israel, people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. If you remember in 1994 when Baruch Goldstein went into the mosque in Hebron and gunned down 29 worshippers during Ramadan, he did it in the name of religion. So there's this aspect to it. And they claim, well, what? They are the chosen people, the elect of God, and they have a right to all the land of Palestine. Now, this is something the Afrikaners who colonized South Africa claim the same thing, that God authorized them to occupy and to establish a system in South Africa. You see? Now, God doesn't well, let's not get into that religious stuff, because that's not the basis for the establishment of states.
Yeah, correct.
That's not the basis for the establishment of states.
I brought it in because the extremist side of Netanyahu party and the coalition would use that always.
Of course,
And the people who are on the border, those are the occupiers for more land, and they keep going. They believe it's their religious right to...
And they're being supported by the evangelical right in the United States. People in the fast, what you call the Bible Belt, in the south of the United States.
I mean, it's a dire situation. You have over 40,800 persons killed.
Sure.
Among these numbers, you have thousands and thousands of women and children. You have, 80, 90,000 people injured. You have almost the entire population displaced. You right now have polio. The United Nations is trying right now to vaccinate the children. Although they asked for a ceasefire, it's happening. At the bombing is taking place while the children are receiving their polio vaccination. One get a sense too that the United Nations and the Security Council and the ICJ, all the resolutions and all the decisions and conclusions is not having and impact. What is your sense of what, in your view, given your knowledge of the region and the people, Hamas, Palestinian Authority, what in your view is going to bring about an urgent solution?
I think we cannot depend on the governments, in the United Nations only, but we have to mobilize civil society. We have to bring the peoples of the world together to dismantle this system, this colonial system, as we did in South Africa. It was not until that regime in South Africa was isolated and became a pariah entity in the international arena, because of its apartheid system, isolated through sanctions, that system in apartheid was dismantled. And I think this is the direction of travel now, that, there is a growing outpour of support for Palestine. You saw the demonstrations across the United States, across Europe, even in parts of the Caribbean. Even here in Grenada, I saw demonstrations.
Yes.
And Israel too. Yeah. So it's a question of isolating that system. It will take time. I mean, South Africa was dismissed from the Commonwealth in 1960. And it didn't take until 1994 before that system was brought down. So it will take time. But, the process has begun. Last week only in Namibia, a ship carrying arms to Israel was turned back and said, you cannot dock in our port because, you're carrying arms to a country that is engaged in genocide, yes. A country that practices apartheid. Yes. These are countries that were victims of apartheid themselves. Namibia was occupied by South Africa. Right. So it's a question of popular support. And we in the Caribbean, by the way, had supported the anti-apartheid movement in the 1970s. In Grenada here, May 25th every year was called African Liberation Day. Yes. And we had programs across the country. Not on the scale that we had in London or other big cities, but we made our own contribution. And I think this is a responsibility that we would have to take up, in the weeks and months ahead as
Hamas, clearly, 7th October, Hamas carried out this raid. 12, the last number is just about 1,250 persons were killed and another 200+ taken as captive. But clearly, a lot of innocent people were killed. Yeah. How do you view Hamas? If you can explain to us what's happening there, but how does Hamas relate, and what is the role of the Palestinian Authority, and how it is likely to find a solution with two opposing governments for the same country, quote unquote, Palestine?
Yeah, it is a problem. But first of all, let's acknowledge the fact that Hamas sees itself, it declares itself to be a national liberation movement, just as Frelimo was in Mozambique, or the ANC in South Africa. It's a national liberation movement dedicated to the removal of a colonial system. In 2006, there was an election, a democratic election there. It was monitored by the international community. The Carter Center in Atlanta was there. All international bodies. Hamas won the elections, hands down. Overwhelmingly, what happened? They said, okay, we don't want to rule by ourselves. We are willing to form a government of national unity with Fatah, the main...
Palestinian Authority.
They got together for a few weeks, and then the Americans began to, say, well, if you go into government with Hamas, there will be no aid, and the solution is, you get rid of them. And so it's well documented in my book on Hamas, how the Americans instigated this coup, which failed, led by Fatah. And they were driven out. How can a government in power stage a coup against itself? It's preposterous. They won the elections. But the thing is, we in this part of the hemisphere, we saw this before in Chile in 1973 when Allende won the elections. It was not suited to the Americans that a socialist would come to power in this part of the world, and they started the process of removal. It didn't take long before he was removed from power. The program that Hamas has, its Islamic identity, its an agenda, as it were, it's declared position that it would not recognize Israel. All of this to the Americans was anathema, and they set about the process of trying to remove them. As I said, it's well documented. Vanity Fair magazine, for example, brought all the documents, you know, at Condoleezza Rice and David Wormser and all the officials in the State Department at the time were involved in plotting this coup. So the thing is, Hamas is recognized as, listen, after the elections, Putin himself said in Spain that he doesn't recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization.
But let me ask you the question. Given what Hamas carried to what do you consider Hamas a terrorist organization?
No, I consider them what they declare themselves to be, not what somebody else labels them to be. Yeah. You know, my identity is the way I describe myself as a Grenadian. Yeah. So they said, we are National Liberation Movement, and I accept that.
Okay. Well, one of the things we learned, or that's been speculated on, is that Hamas carried out this action as a result of what was happening at that time in the Middle East. It was felt that a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, some of these countries, were getting cozy to Israel. Even the international community, the Palestinian issue was on the back burner. It was not, so Hamas felt that it was, by carrying out such an action, it will bring its cause and its issue of Palestine on the table. Do you buy this argument?
Yes, that is true. Yeah. But it's not the only, you know, cause, as it were, of the assault on Israel. You have to remember that the Gaza Strip was under blockade for 17 years. Yeah, very strict and inhuman blockade. You know, no medicine, no food, no fuel. You know, people were just barely surviving for 17 years. What was the justification for this? These were the same people who, you know why they did it? Because they wanted the people to rise up against Hamas. It never worked in history. It never worked when you apply pressure on a people that they would rise up against their governments. When the Germans bombed London, the Blitz in the 1940s, did the British rise up against Churchill? They didn't. No. On the contrary, they supported him. You see? So the blockade has never, you know, resulted in a rebellion or a revolt against Hamas, you know, over the years.
And of course, in the Caribbean, Cuba never go against Castro.
Exactly.
Matter of fact, they got more focus to deal with it.
Precisely.
So and of course, we're talking about the Gaza Strip, but the West Bank is also, and we see over 600-700 persons have been killed in the West Bank since the October 7th. But I want to look at the international perspective, looking at the United States. How do you perceive the United States' role in the conflict? Can the U.S. be a neutral mediator, and what steps should it take to promote peace, given the fact that it is supplying most of the arms that is causing the destruction in the first place? But what is your view on the role of the United States, and how could they better manage the role? Can they play that role? Can it work?
You see, the United States and the Western governments, their approach to the whole thing is to manage the conflict, not to resolve it. Keep the lid on.
Interesting.
Yeah, you know, keep the lid on. No revolt. You know, give them some food and the rest of it.
It's a big commercial thing for them to see that.
But to resolve the conflict in a just manner, solve the fundamental grievances. Because if you want to resolve a dispute, you look at the core grievances. Right. The core grievances was the dispossession of these people.
But they're talking two-state solution.
As I said to you, they're not working. Netanyahu says all this land belongs to us.
There will be, but they're doing it.
He said, God gave us this land. It belongs to us. There will be no Palestinian state. The Americans are silent.
They're talking more about it now because they have elections coming up soon.
Yes.
They want the votes in this regard.
They want the song correct, I suspect.
But how do you view the Caribbean stance on the Palestinian conflict? Do you see a unified position? And how can the region play a better role in advocating? I mean, we saw, and I can tell you that most of the region now have recognized the state of Palestine. But that's a recognition. It doesn't go beyond that. But what, in your view, should happen more? What would you like to see to really be more, as you really pointed out, part of the solution is the international solidarity.
So, well, as I also said that South Africa, for example, was expelled from the UN in 1960, expelled, had no part in UN affairs. They say, because Israel is not only guilty of the crime of apartheid and genocide, as the ICJ, you know, in its advisory report said, but it has also breached the conditions of its membership. You know, it breached the conditions of its membership, and countries of our region here must now turn and look at this critically and say, well, if you break the conditions of your membership...
Like Belize and Colombia, these are two countries that have taken extreme measures on Israel. Yeah.
Well, and other countries in Latin America, I mean, you know, like Colombia, you rightly said, Chile, Brazil, Cuba, of course, you know, and we hope that the Caribbean countries would lend their support to the whole thing, because if you remember, the OAS has, Israel is a member of the OAS. It is an honorary advisor of the OAS.
Serious? I wasn't aware of that,
and
Chris.
It's the only country apart from Spain to have that position in the OAS. And you know who dominates the OAS. So when we come to CARICOM, we don't want them. We don't want to be giving them, you know, observer status in CARICOM, because the result would be catastrophic for our people. You see, so this is where we are at. The same has happened in the African Union. They have since 2013, between 2013 and 2016, they applied for observer status in the African Union. It was rejected.
But Doc, when you look at the countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and some of them, I think there's a Arabic Union thing, I can't remember the name.
League.
Right, the League. They don't seem to be, they are also playing games in my view. Because here, this country, Palestine, you know, in this genocide situation, and they're playing games with Israel and not coming together to take a definitive stance.
You're absolutely right. It was not an Arab country that brought the matter to the ICJ. It was South Africa. It was South Africa, you know, and until now, none of them, only Egypt has said, okay, we want to join the process, you know, of seeing that charge go through the ICJ. But the fact of the matter is these countries are not independent. You know, they are client states of the United States. Many of them are not democratic, or most of them, if not all, are not democratic. You know, even after Israel, Egypt is the largest beneficiary of American aid, and Egypt, you know, has been neutralized in the whole conflict, you know, in the region with regard to Palestine. They have been neutralized after the Camp David agreement. So the truth is, we cannot rely on these governments in the region. It's unfortunate, but on the other hand, we've seen solid support coming from South Africa. In fact, Southern Africa, I should say, Southern Africa, Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, you know, all these countries are supporting. And this is why Israel was never given a seat as an observer in the African Union because of its apartheid policies.
I mean, Dr. Abdullah, what do you believe is the most viable path to achieving the peace between Palestine and Israel? Are there any solutions that you feel are not being adequately explored at this time, given your sense of what's taking place there?
Okay, let me say that, you know, a solution must not be based on ethnicity. Israel wants to be an ethnic state, pure and simple, exclusive for the Jewish people. They said this land is for all the Jews. So if there's going to be a solution, remove ethnicity out of it. But let it be a solution where all the people of the land share in its resources. All the people in the land participate in its political processes, as we have in South Africa today. One man, one vote. The land belongs to all. I'm not saying that's a perfect solution, you know, because we know in South Africa today there are issues about land. You know, still South Africans, the native people, You know, they still complain about the fact that, you know, they haven't had, you know, access to some of the land that is just there and they can't use it. But it's a step forward. And one of the things that the mechanisms that we saw quite successfully, which was applied successfully there, was what they call the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Reverend Tutu. You know, where people came together, poured out their grievances, addressed them, you know, in a very frank manner. And try to move on. You know, people who committed rape, who committed murder, all of this was you know, addressed openly, and justice was allowed to take its course. You know, so many crimes have been committed in Palestine.
Yeah, because I wanted to get, when you look at the destruction in Palestine, it is constructive. I say that to say infrastructure is being damaged to the point where to rebuild is going to be significant. Roads, water networks, electrical networks, everything is being
schools.
And it's it's a constructive, calculated destruction.
That is what is that's the definition of genocide.
Yes,
the systematic destruction of a people in whole or in part. Here we see it happening in whole.
Yes.
You know, everything, as you said, being destroyed, being dismantled.
And the thing is, here you are in this time of our development, so-called development in the world, and we just sitting by and let this one little country have its own way in this dismantling of a nation and its people. Yeah. And
because the Westerners, they have a guilt complex. You know, what happened in Europe in the 1940s, the Holocaust, they feel guilty about it, and someone else has to pay the bill for it. Unfortunately, it's the Palestinians.
Dr. Abdullah, before the break, we were talking about, we talked a bit about the role of the international organization, but international justice I want to go at. How can international law and justice be leveraged to address issues like the alleged war crimes, the broader question of genocide in the region? You know, how can this happen? Because that needs to take place. Because Israel is behaving as a law
above the law.
Above the law.
Yeah.
You know, it's what must happen here?
Well, okay. The two things we want to make a distinction between. The ICJ, its opinions are not and cannot be enforced by the court itself. They are merely advisory. But the ICC, the criminal court, International Criminal Court, it can issue arrest warrants for people who have committed war crimes.
This is pending for Netanyahu?
Not yet. The prosecutor has called on the judges now to issue warrants for Netanyahu and his defense minister. Until now,
and the Hamas
Ismail Hani, well, he's dead now.
Yeah, he's dead now. Yeah, right. They can,
he's dead.
Right,
he's out of the picture.
Okay.
But the thing is, the judges are stalling. They have not issued an arrest warrant, which the prosecutor asked for. And Mr. Putin now faces an arrest because, you know, the same court, the same prosecutor, the same judges, took a mere 2 weeks to issue a warrant for his arrest. It didn't take long.
So you're saying the judges are influenced politically also?
It would appear so. It seems so. You know,
until we get something from them.
That's the perception.
Okay.
That's the perception we have.
Israel is not members of the ICC.
They have not ratified. Russia is not.
And Russia is not.
Russia is not. So how can you go after Russia and not go after Israel? What's the justification?
Just like the United States, they're not a member of the ICC.
Right. Yeah. So, but the thing is, there are other mechanisms. The Geneva Convention obliges its signatories to pursue, you know, and apprehend and prosecute people who breach the Geneva Convention. So this is why when Tzipi Livni, who was then the foreign minister of Israel, came to London a few years ago, there was an arrest warrant waiting for her. She didn't disembark from the plane. And it happened in Spain, and it happened in Belgium. Courts can activate this procedure because of the fact that they are signatories to the Geneva Convention. Now, let me go back to the ICC, because in Africa it was seen as a court was a court that was only set up for African leaders. About 40 African leaders were brought before the ICC.
40?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apart from those in the Balkans, like Milosevic and that group. No other. So what happened a few years ago, an African court was set up.
Yeah.
And the former leader of Chad, Hissène Habré, was brought before that court and convicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity while he was in power in Chad.
Yes.
So it's a precedent, and it shows that countries, outside of Europe can take the initiative, set up their own, legal measures and court systems to try war criminals. And they don't have to depend on these people with their double standards.
Doc, being a Muslim scholar, as you are, how does faith, in your view, could influence the conflict? How is it influencing the conflict? Both pro and con, that is, yeah.
I see, there's a principle in Islam: support your brother, whether he's zalim or mazlum, whether he's an oppressor or whether he's oppressed. So this is a statement by the Prophet, peace be upon him. So he was asked, how can I support my brother when he's an oppressor? He said, stop him from doing it. You with me? You stop him from doing it. But these Western governments, they have a right to support their brother. Whatever, in religion, the co-religionist. But when the co-religionist does wrong, they should stop him. Don't encourage him. Don't harm him. Don't do that. Stop him from oppressing. I think that's the lesson, at least for my faith, for my religion, that I carry forward to this discussion.
Well, it's like saying that if you stay silent in atrocities, you're just part of it.
No, yes, exactly.
You must speak about it and deal with it.
And Desmond Tutu very often did affirm that principle.
Returning to Grenada, what are your thoughts on returning to Grenada? How does this international experience shape your views on the Caribbean role on global issues?
Let me say that as a Grenadian, when I tell people abroad, wherever I go, and I'm from Grenada, I feel a sense of greater respect, and appreciation, because of our experience, particularly in the 1970s and 80s. People, they always like, those who stand up for their rights, those who challenge oppressors, those who seek justice on behalf of the oppressed. Nicaragua, for example, its ports were mined by the Americans. And Grenada, when the whole dispute with the Americans was the claim that Grenada was a port of transshipment of weapons to Nicaragua. It was never unsubstantiated. But when it went to the ICJ ruled that the Americans had no right to do what? To mine the ports of Nicaragua. As a Grenadian, we feel proud of what we have achieved in the region. We feel proud that we have been in the forefront of trying to break the siege, the blockade, the isolation of Cuba. How many students, how many doctors from Grenada were trained in Cuba? Many countries in the region didn't want to have anything to do with Cuba. It was Grenada who led the way, and opened up its arms arms up for cooperation, with the people of Cuba, and we have benefited tremendously. We were pioneers, as it were, in this respect. Others have followed, and it's good. It's positive. Today we see, CARICOM expanding its cooperation to other non-English-speaking countries like Cuba, like Haiti, like the Dominican Republic, and that is healthy, and we played a role in it.
Looking at the future outlook, like your final thoughts, what is your outlook for the future of the Middle East, particularly regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and what gives you hope? What concerns you the most in this regard?
Well, let me say that, colonization, you know, however long it lasted, it did ultimately come to an end. The French were in Algeria for 135 years. And when the Algerians started the War of Liberation, over 1 million were killed. But in the end, they succeeded. They got their freedom. And so the Palestinian people, it's 75 years, you know, that they have been occupied and driven out of their homes. But with determination, with resolve, with support from friendly peoples, with solidarity from friendly peoples across the world, they will, like the Algerians, get there also. Like the people of Mozambique and Angola and South Africa, they will get there. What concerns me, well, is the hypocrisy, you know, that we see so prevalent, so dominant, you know, in the discourse on Palestine. When we see countries, you know, that preach human rights, that preach democracy, that talk about you know, liberal values, you know, and they support the killing of babies and children. They arm these people to kill, you know, in such a gruesome and wanton manner. You know, that hurts, that pains a lot. Yeah. And I've seen that for the last, almost 1 year. I've seen that unfold before me, and it's painful.
Yeah, they have no moral standing as far as we are aware in the world anymore to say that they are superior democracy and they have a certain moral.
They've discredited themselves.
Yes,
they have.
And I keep saying, when you have people like Mr. Trump and others who 320 million people as the best candidates you can get, something is wrong.
Yes.
Because we reflect our leaders as people.
Yes,
so
indeed.
I think there is a serious issue there, you know, in these countries. Doc, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
It is a real pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.